A 2-year-old vanishes from a hamlet so small that everyone might mean a dozen neighbours. For months, Émile Soleil is everywhere in France. On posters, in headlines, in prayer circles. Yet nowhere on the mountain where he was last seen. Then, on March 30th, 2024, a hiker finds bones in the woods and brings them to police. The next day, prosecutors confirm what the country had feared. DNA testing shows the remains are Émile's. From that moment, it stops being a missing child case and becomes something else entirely. There's still no cause of death, but what follows are forensic signs that someone else may have been involved. Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we trace the timeline, unpack the theories, and examine what most likely happened. On July 8, 2023, Émile Soleil, a 2.5-year-old boy, arrives in Auvergne, a quiet Alpine hamlet where his maternal grandparents have a holiday home. That afternoon, he's seen by 2 neighbours walking alone along a small road in the hamlet. Then he disappears. Authorities are alerted quickly. The search begins the same day, involving police, soldiers, helicopters, drones, and sniffer dogs. Yet in this small, isolated area, no trace is found. No body, no clothing, no footprints. The total lack of evidence, despite an intense search, becomes one of the case's defining mysteries. Over the following weeks, Émile's face becomes nationally recognized. The story spreads. His parents, described as devout Catholics, make emotional appeals. In one they plead, "Tell us where he is." The wording reflects not certainty of loss, but an open question. One that continues through late 2023 as the search yields nothing. Then, on March 30th, 2024, nearly 9 months after the disappearance, a hiker finds bones in a forested area near the hamlet and brings them to the police in the bag. The next day, prosecutor Jean-Luc Blachon confirms the remains are Émile's. The police were informed of the discovery of bones near the hamlet of Le Vernet, Blachon says. DNA testing confirms the identification. Émile's parents release a statement through lawyer Jérôme Triomphe, calling the news heartbreaking and ask for privacy. The time has come for mourning, contemplation, and prayer. In early April, investigators return to the area and recover scattered items of Émile's clothing. His t-shirt, shoes, and underpants spread over several dozen meters. A small additional bone fragment is found nearby. The skull shows signs of trauma. Still, no official cause of death is announced. At that point, all explanations remain open. Blachon states, "Between a fall, manslaughter, and murder, we still cannot favour one hypothesis over another." Time passes. Émile's funeral is held on February 8, 2025. The family says they continue to live without answers and call for truth to replace silence. That shift comes weeks later. On March 25th, Émile's grandparents, an uncle and an aunt, are detained as part of a criminal investigation. 2 days later, they're released. Prosecutors make clear this is not the end. That does not mean that it is definitively over. At a press conference on March 27, 2025, Blachon outlines new conclusions based on expert analysis. Émile did not get stray on his own to the place where his bones were found. His remains and clothing were transported and deposited shortly before their discovery. The skull bore scars suggestive of violent facial trauma. None of these are theories. They're official summaries of expert findings. At that point, the facts are no longer abstract. Émile didn't simply vanish. He died, and someone, at some point, placed his body in the forest. Four ways to explain what happened to Émile Soleil. After Émile's remains were found in March 2024, the investigation shifted from disappearance to death. By March 2025, prosecutors publicly acknowledged that someone likely moved the body and that the child had suffered trauma. But well before that, the public conversation had split into competing theories. Below are the main explanations that have shaped both media coverage and the official investigation, each pointing to a different kind of event. Number 1. A family member was involved. This theory suggests something happened within the child's immediate surroundings. An accident, negligence, or intentional harm, followed by concealment. It's not just speculation. In March 2025, Émile's maternal grandparents, an uncle and an aunt, were detained and questioned by police, then released. Prosecutor Jean-Luc Blachon was careful in tone. "The case is not over," he said. "Their release does not mean that it is definitively over." Investigators described the detentions as part of efforts to clarify grey areas. 3 forensic elements give weight to this theory. The remains and clothes were transported and deposited shortly before their discovery. The skull showed scars suggestive of violent facial trauma. Prosecutors noted that the child's body had not decomposed in the clothes found in the forest. Together, those statements imply the child did not die where he was found, and that someone likely managed what happened afterward. Number 2. A stranger took him. The outsider theory holds that an unknown person entered the area, abducted Émile, and later placed the remains. Since prosecutors referred to the probable intervention of a third party, this version can't be dismissed. But it faces real obstacles. Auvernay is remote and tiny. Émile vanished in broad daylight, within a narrow window of time. No confirmed trace of a vehicle, outsider, or disturbance was ever made public. The massive search that followed turned up nothing. For a stranger to abduct and later stage a body, without being seen twice, requires both luck and planning. That doesn't make it impossible. But as time went on, investigators appeared to focus less on unknown outsiders and more on those within the child's immediate reach. Number 3. Émile wandered off and died in the wild. This was the earliest and simplest explanation, that Émile walked away, got lost, and died due to exposure, injury, or terrain. Wildlife or time may have scattered the remains. It was a credible theory for months. In April 2024, shortly after the remains were found, Blachon said, "Between a fall, manslaughter, and murder, we still cannot favor one hypothesis over another." But a year later, that balance shifted. Prosecutors stated that Émile did not get stray on his own to the place where his bones were found, and that the body had been deposited recently, not left there in 2023. If those statements are accurate, the idea of a natural accident becomes harder to sustain. It doesn't explain the movement, the trauma, or the delayed discovery. Number 4. The media made it worse. This isn't a theory about cause of death, it's about how the narrative formed. From early on, media scrutiny circled the family, especially the grandfather, whose political past and religious background were frequently mentioned. None of this proved anything, but suspicion became part of the story. In cases like this, when a child disappears and no suspect is identified, attention often shifts towards whoever seems most composed, different, or private. Journalists and analysts have described this as a vacuum effect, where lack of answers leads to escalating speculation. This lens doesn't explain what happened to Émile, but it explains how certain people came under pressure, sometimes before the evidence pointed there. Each of these theories offers a different logic. Some focus on physical access, others on behavior. One leans on simplicity, one on the shape of public attention. But only one aligns cleanly with what's now been said on record by those closest to the investigation. Next, we walk through that version and the reasoning that makes it the most likely. When evidence narrows the field. By early 2025, nearly every possibility had been floated. That Émile Soleil vanished into nature, that someone outside the family found him, that something tragic occurred closer to home. But when the formal tone of investigation shifted from open-ended uncertainty to an emphasis on forensic interpretation, the case subtly but decisively turned. Jean-Luc Blachon, the lead prosecutor in Aix-en-Provence, spoke in careful, structured language at his March 27, 2025 briefing. Still, two of his statements reframed the case in ways that are hard to walk back. First, the remains and clothing were transported and deposited shortly before their discovery. Second, the skull bore scars suggestive of violent facial trauma. If both of those statements reflect the conclusions of court-appointed experts, as reported by multiple sources, then much of the speculative scaffolding around the case collapses, because together, these 2 points imply something very specific. Émile did not die where he was found, and he did not die peacefully. From there, the question becomes less open-ended and more surgical. Who had the access and opportunity to be involved in a death that occurred elsewhere, followed by the delayed, deliberate placement of remains? Eliminating what doesn't fit. The simplest place to begin is by excluding the scenarios that no longer fit the known pattern. A theory in which Émile wanders off and dies naturally, by exposure or accident, now runs directly against forensic analysis. Blachon has said the remains were moved recently, meaning they had not lain undiscovered in that forest clearing since July 2023. That movement implies human agency. It also weakens any model based on the idea that no one knew where he was. The outsider theory also begins to strain under the weight of detail. For a stranger to take a child from a rural hamlet in broad daylight without being seen and later return, months later, to stage remains without leaving trace in either instance, requires a sequence of actions that, while not impossible, demands multiple strokes of logistical luck. The hamlet is small. The time window is narrow. The area was scoured for days. No suspicious outsider vehicle, phone record, or footprint has ever been publicly confirmed. That leaves a narrower category. Individuals with close access to the child, an understanding of the local terrain, and a plausible ability to place remains at a later date without being noticed. A restricted circle. Access is often the fulcrum in unresolved cases, and here it reduces the field sharply. Émile was last seen alive within Auvernay, walking alone along a road, but not far from the home where he had just arrived to spend the holidays. Those who had physical proximity to him during those moments are a small and well-defined group, primarily members of the extended family, along with a few neighbors. The police, it seems, reached the same conclusion. Their March 2025 detentions, though not resulting in charges, were not arbitrary. The individuals questioned were Émile's maternal grandparents, along with an uncle and aunt. That focus only makes strategic sense if the investigation had arrived at a point where others could be reasonably ruled out. The public justification for the detentions was an attempt to clarify grey areas. But by this stage, with over 3,000 verified tips processed and more than 50 searches conducted, those grey areas were likely very few in number. What remains then is a model of the event that doesn't require mystery, only human frailty and time. A straight-line sequence. The following outlines a possible sequence of events based on allegations and publicly available findings. The likeliest reconstruction, based on all public disclosures, is as follows. Émile becomes momentarily unsupervised on the afternoon of July 8, 2023. Something occurs. Whether a fall, an act of physical discipline gone wrong, or a medical event exacerbated by panic, that results in a fatal injury. The trauma observed on the skull, described as consistent with facial violence, suggests an impact or collision, not a slow, natural decline. Instead of immediately alerting authorities, someone takes action to conceal what happened. Whether out of fear, shame, or instinct, that decision initiates a cover-up. The child's body is kept elsewhere for a significant period. Forensic statements suggest decomposition did not occur in the same context as the clothing found in the forest, implying either movement after decomposition or separate storage conditions. At a later date, possibly months later, someone transports a portion of the remains, along with select clothing items, to a wooded area near the hamlet. The location is close enough to be symbolic. He was here all along, but remote enough via steep and wooded access to discourage casual discovery. This placement occurs shortly before March 30th, 2024, the day a hiker stumbles upon the bones and carries them to police. At that point, the illusion of a natural disappearance is ruptured. Forensic do not support a year-long decomposition in place. They point instead to a post-mortem relocation. And that relocation is not random. It suggests local knowledge, intentionality, and a desire for plausible closure without actual confession. The psychology of concealment. One of the defining features of real-world accidental deaths involving family members is the decision point that follows the event. In those first seconds or minutes, people either report or react. And when they react, what follows is often not malicious planning, but a series of escalating misjudgments, hiding the body, delaying the call, misleading the search. This is not a theory that requires malice. It requires a critical moment, followed by a series of actions designed to contain it. The trauma to Émile's skull could result from a range of causes: a shove, a door, a fall, even an unintentional blow. But the decision to remove, store, and later relocate the body points to at least one person making a series of choices that went beyond panic, and toward preservation of a version of events that did not include the truth. The role of search and strategy. The original search in July 2023 was intensive, military, aerial, canine. That it failed to locate a body at the eventual site supports the idea that the remains weren't there at the time, which in turn means someone, likely aware of the perimeter and its weaknesses, selected a placement spot that would seem both credible and just out of reach. This part matters. Whoever chose that location knew both the land and the investigative tempo. The odds of an outsider guessing that spot and timing a body placement to just before the March 2024 discovery, without detection, are extremely low. In contrast, someone embedded in the area or in touch with those familiar with the case would know how and when the search intensity had waned. They'd know how to walk a steep trail unnoticed. They'd know which time of year hikers returned to the forest paths. In short, they'd know how to appear absent from the story until a body appeared in it. Why this theory holds more than others. Compared to alternate explanations, this scenario aligns with the proximity of last confirmed sightings, the absence of remains during the initial search, forensic evidence pointing to recent placement and physical trauma, the investigatory focus on immediate family members, the prosecutor's careful choice of words, not murder, not accident, but intervention. Importantly, it avoids the need to imagine complex conspiracies or invisible perpetrators. It leans instead on what is already known, that Émile was in a confined space, among known people, during the final moments anyone saw him, and that someone had both the motive and opportunity to shape the story afterward. The case is not closed, but the margins for uncertainty have narrowed. When Occam's razor is applied, not to silence doubt, but to remove what cannot be supported, what's left is a version of events that's less about a shadowy outsider or a tragic natural ending, and more about a quiet place, a small group of people, and a moment that changed everything. What most likely happened to Émile Soleil is not yet proven in court, but the path toward the truth now runs through a single devastating idea. Someone close to him knows more than they've said. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.